Hello, I'm Seth Broder. Welcome to another edition of the ARC Report. The unfortunate reality is that sexual violence in our society has become an all too common problem, one that dawns our news outlets on what seems like an everyday basis. The problem is even worse with regard to people with intellectual disabilities. Today we will hear from Jessica Oppenheim from the ARC of New Jersey, as well as Louise McCarthy from the ARC of Gloucester, who will discuss this exact issue. We'll be right back. We're back with Jessica Oppenheim, Director of the Criminal Justice and Advocacy Program for the ARC of New Jersey. Jessica, so nice of you to be with us today.
Thanks, I appreciate you having me.
What does it mean to be the director?
Well, as you're aware, I'm a retired prosecutor. So about 8 years ago, I retired from the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, and this was a great opportunity for me. The Criminal Justice Advocacy Program is really quite something. We're the only program in New Jersey that does what we do, and one of only a handful around the country. We work with individuals with developmental disabilities who get involved in the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, they can be grossly overrepresented in our county jails and state prisons, so we work to find alternative dispositions for them, dismissal of charges, that kind of thing, put plans together to keep them safely in the community. And part of our goal, too, is to work with people who've been victimized. We know this is a highly vulnerable population, and so we're working with everyone who gets involved in the system, be it defendants, offenders, suspects, victims, and witnesses.
How long have you been in this position?
It's almost 8 years now.
Wow.
Yes.
So, clearly in today's society, we have a major problem with sexual violence. You see this with high-profile cases involving celebrities, athletes, members of the media, and even, unfortunately, politicians.
Yes.
But people with intellectual disabilities are assaulted 7 times
That's correct.
at a greater rate than people without these disabilities. That's staggering.
It is. It's a shocking statistic, and it really is the one that's gotten everyone's attention. But yes, we think that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are 7 times more likely to be victimized by sexual violence than their non-disabled cohorts.
Well, are the reasons obvious?
Well, I think they're obvious to those of us in the community, but if you don't know people with disabilities, maybe it's not. To really understand that someone with a disability may need to be very supported by a caregiver, so sometimes that balance of power is affected, and that's often what sexual assault is about, right? Power and control. So if you have those opportunities and someone with a disability maybe hasn't received the same level of sex education that mainstream students receive, or perhaps lives in a more isolated setting than other people, or isn't working out in the community the way people without disabilities do, all of those things make someone more vulnerable to this kind of sexual violence. And that's exactly what we're looking at now. But you pointed out, really it's the Me Too movement. There was a great piece by Joe Shapiro on NPR that has been the catalyst behind us all focusing on this. It's not really new. It's been happening for generations. What's new, and I hope is really the beginning of a change, is that we're focusing on it and we're talking about it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you did hit on that. I was going to hit on that later with the Me Too movement. But I would imagine that all of this discussion is really what led the ARC of New Jersey to host the Leadership Summit in June. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for mentioning it. Yes. Really, the Me Too movement began. There was a series of articles on NPR, if anybody's had an opportunity to hear those, by a correspondent named Joe Shapiro, who spoke to people who've been victimized, support providers, families, caregivers, and realized that this was something we weren't talking about and needed to. So it really was the catalyst for the ARC of New Jersey, and we're the statewide organization, to say we need to lead on this topic. We need to be out there and talk about it. We need to talk about it with people with disabilities, with their families, with the professionals who work with them and serve them. So on June 14th, we convened a leadership summit, and it was our opportunity to bring together a large group of stakeholders. So we brought to the table people with disabilities, families, caregivers, direct support providers, professionals in the field, law enforcement, prosecutors, sex educators, anyone that we thought could have some good input into this problem and to really address it on a bigger basis.
The Us Too movement, is that, I
That's
say
right.
that because...
Nothing about us without us.
That's right.
Absolutely.
So you actually coined that phrase, correct?
That's right.
That's great. That's
Nothing
brilliant.
about us without us. No more victims.
Yes.
That's
so,
our goal.
What were the takeaways from the summit?
It was wonderful. We really had a great group of people with a lot of expertise, and what was interesting to us, I think, is that it was an opportunity to hear from people coming from a lot of different directions and bring it all together. So we took all of that information, all of that expertise, and we created a white paper. And that's been, you can find that on our website, that's been published, and we're hoping to take the next steps from there.
So how much of what was discussed, and again, I've read the white paper as well, but how much deals with self-advocacy and education versus creating a more stringent set of laws for sexual predators and offenders?
I think
Or is there a happy medium there?
a little of everything.
Yeah.
I think empowerment. Empowerment for people with disabilities is the #1 priority. We certainly have laws on the books. As I mentioned, I'm a prosecutor, and I've prosecuted sex assault cases, domestic violence cases. We have laws on the books, but people need to be able to have a voice. And without that voice, law enforcement, prosecutors can't do their job. So when we really thought about it, we decided that prevention is really the #1 issue. So when you read the white paper, you'll see really the first thing we talk about is the need for prevention, sex education, making sure that people understand what their rights are and how to voice their rights.
So it really is heavily based on education and awareness.
That's right.
Okay.
Now we're hoping to do other things too. We have a long list of priorities, but you do have to prioritize. And I'd say that prevention is the #1 priority. So we're hoping to look at media campaigns to just change the culture. Just the fact that we're talking about it now is, I think, the beginning of a culture change, something that wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. We're willing to talk about it, we're willing to address it, but we need to get everybody on board, not just people within our community, but the whole community. We want to be part of that.
Now, I note that Pennsylvania has recently passed legislation. Massachusetts and California has proposed legislation on this specific topic, and you say that New Jersey already has some legislation. Is there more that could be done?
Always, always. We're hoping
Spoken
to
like a true prosecutor, by the way.
Spoken like a lawyer, right?
Yes.
Always. We're one of the things we're hoping to do is to review the current state of the statutory law, regulation, court rules, everything that addresses how we investigate sexual assault cases, how we prosecute sexual assault cases, and also what other agencies do about it. Adult Protective Services, DCP&P, Children and Family Protection. All of those agencies need to come on board so that we're looking at civil issues, we're looking at criminal issues. You can never focus on just one piece. I think that's sometimes one of the weaknesses in the past. We look for that one magic bullet, that thing, that statute, that regulation, that topic that will fix it. And I think one of our takeaways from the summit was to see how this touches on so many different people, so many different kinds of people, so many agencies. And one of our goals is really to keep drawing on that, to keep that multidisciplinary feel going.
What's the next step? In other words, will there be another summit? Is this something that's going to happen annually?
Thank you for asking that. Actually, we've decided our first step is to revitalize our Partners in Justice. That's a multidisciplinary group that we've actually been working with through the Arc of New Jersey since 1999. We had really kind of fallen by the wayside, and this is our opportunity to say we're bringing all of our partners in justice back to the table. We're going to use our white paper as the foundation for going forward, and our next meeting is actually next Wednesday on December 12th, when we'll be bringing that group, many of whom were part of the summit. This is a smaller group, together to do exactly that, to begin the work.
Okay. Jessica, we have a few more minutes left for this segment, so I just have two more questions. First, can you talk about the Pathways to Justice program?
Yeah, I'd love to, thank you. It's important to us that the self-advocacy community be a part of what we're doing. So we've talked to the self-advocates about what they're interested in doing. And one of the things they've talked about again and again is the need to train law enforcement and prosecutors in New Jersey. We have about 38,000 sworn law enforcement officers in the state of New Jersey, many of whom act as first responders, so it becomes really important for them to know us and for us to know them. So one of our first goals is going to be to institute a program called the Pathways to Justice Training Program. It's through the Arc of the United States. We were a pilot program for them, and now we're hoping to move that forward into all the counties, all 21 counties, ultimately, a one-day training, an opportunity for self-advocates and law enforcement to meet, to get to know one another in a non-crisis setting, and to understand who they're dealing with.
Okay, so specifically the issue there is perhaps a victim that has a disability would be different than a victim that does not have a disability? Is that where the training
Absolutely.
takes place?
Helps them identify who they're working with, improves communication, improves their ability to find out what happened and understand what the issues are. Communication is really the goal here, right? For a law enforcement officer in a first responder setting, if they're faced with a victim who has a disability, this really may not be something they have a history or experience with.
Has that been a problem in the past?
Absolutely.
It has.
Over the years, it's something that's come up again and again. There are cases, for example, the Glen Ridge case in the late 80s, which was really one of the discussion points that NPR used out of Essex County. Bob Lorino was the assistant prosecutor who handled the case then. The issue specifically was that they were working with a victim who had a developmental disability. And some of the concerns that raises, some of the communication issues that have to be changed. We've been very strong in New Jersey on victim rights. Let me say that. We have a constitutional amendment. We have a statute on victims' rights. But we really need to even expand it further and ensure that people with developmental disabilities who've been victimized are comfortable accessing victim services, are comfortable talking to law enforcement, are allowed to use SANE SART nurse services if that's needed as part of the sexual assault investigation. There are all kinds of services that we're beginning to, we want to make sure that it's accessible to our community as well.
Okay. And what about the self-advocacy project?
That's been a very important piece. At the Arc of New Jersey, we have a number of programs. We have a Family Institute that works with families, my program that works with offenders and victims, but the Self-Advocacy Project counsels all over the state. They're individuals who work with people with disabilities themselves. It's their opportunity to come together for social purposes, for educational purposes, and we're really happy that we're going to have a number of people who are self-advocates as part of our Partners in Justice Task Force. They're going to be helping with Pathways to Justice. They're a partner in Pathways to Justice. That's the most effective way to do this training.
So they really are linked then?
Exactly.
These two entities, if
Exactly.
you will. Okay.
That's our hope. We want to keep everybody moving together on the same page.
Great. And if any of our viewers want more information about this issue and what the Arc of New Jersey is doing, perhaps if there's the ability to attend the meeting, how would they reach out to you, or how would they find out what's next?
We'd love to have them do that. The Arc of New Jersey, they should go on our website. Not only is there my program, the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program, and they can contact me. We have a Family Institute and a Self-Advocacy Project, both of which do a lot of work all over the state with people with disabilities, with families, with schools, and anyone who has an interest, I'd really direct them to our website. They'll find all those contacts there.
And is that www? ArcNewJersey.com?
arcnj.org, that's right.
NJ.org.
That's
okay.
right.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. This has been
Thank
incredibly
you.
informative, and the work that you specifically in the ARC New Jersey are doing, just tremendous, and we can't
Thank you so much.
enough.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We'll be right back. We are back with Louise McCarthy, Development Specialist for the ARC of Gloucester. Louise, how are you? Thank you for being here.
Good, thank you for having me, Seth.
You know, I have to tell you, not to make you nervous or anything, but you are filling pretty big shoes right now, considering that this is Ana Rivera's typical spot on the show.
I know, those are big shoes to follow.
You're ready for this
and
challenge,
I'm very
right?
honored. I'm going to do my best.
Good. Okay. Well, we're all counting on you. So, Jessica, I know you were sitting here and you were viewing the last segment with Jessica Oppenheim from ARC of New Jersey. And we were talking about the ARC New Jersey Summit and how important that is, and the topic that was discussed is clearly so important. I understand ARC Gloucester is working on something similar. Is that correct?
Somewhat. It was quite timely. Back in January, I got a call from the Center for Family Services regarding a federal grant they were looking into that needed a partnership. And they have the SERVE program, which is the Services Empowering the Rights for Victims. And we'll also be partnering with the Recovery Network for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So we did develop an MOU, an understanding with them, and then she called us in early September to say that they did receive the grant. So we're very excited to be partnering with them to move forward with this grant.
Okay. And is this program geared specifically for people that are deaf and hard of hearing, or does it get a little bit more general?
For disabilities.
Okay.
It's geared toward disabilities, and the deaf and hard of hearing community, as well as the intellectual and developmental disabilities community, are a very vulnerable population when it comes to this issue. They are in a lot of areas. I think you know the stats. 1 in every 3 women have been a victim, 1 in about every 6 men, and 7 times that rate for those with disabilities, especially intellectual and developmental disabilities. What I've learned through this partnership, too, is the deaf and hard of hearing community is also affected at quite a high rate because the perpetrator might be their interpreter or something, so it's very hard. So this opportunity to combine with them, we're excited. We also have a family intervention program, as you well know. So our Lisa Foster from there will be helping with that, since they do deal with family services, and to educate those who may have been victims, their caregivers,